So week one has officially came and went. We kicked off the football season this weekend with our first action slate of football, and man oh man was it a great time to watch. Heading into week two though means some of us either started the fantasy football season great or really terrible with injuries or just a flat out loss. But hey, keep your chin up, champ. There are still 17 more weeks of the fantasy season to go, and one loss is not the end of the world. Either way, if you want to have the leg up over some of your league mates and dominate your fantasy football league, one thing you got to master is the waiver wire. And so far, going into week two, there are plenty of waiver wire ads that can help your depth or help you fill out a position of need on your fantasy football team. With all that being said though, here are some fantasy football players I love on waivers and my official waiver wire pickup video. Make sure you're subscribed with notifications on so you don't miss an upload. And yeah, let's just get into it.
Allen zips it to his left. Shakir dancing to the 5, spins toward the goal line, dives forward, touchdown, Bills!
Now, Isaiah Likely quite literally stole all the attention in week one, and for good reason. Likely had 111 yards, 9 receptions, and a touchdown, and was frankly a toe away from a second, all adding up to a whopping 26.1 PPR points. Now, pushing it back a little bit, heading into this fantasy football season, obviously there's a lot of hype around a lot of players. Isaiah Likely was one of those players as like a handcuffed tight end, being that he fit in this offense so well last year when Mark Andrews went down, and frankly, he was a very good pass-catching tight end. That being said, though, he didn't really make a lot of waves. They were more like the kiddie waves, you know, like he was there, like the upside would 100% be there, but nobody really knew what his role was going to be in this offense. Now, obviously, after Thursday night in Kansas City, it's been like a tsunami with the Isaiah Likely frenzy right now. I mean, he was so good. He's got Mark Andrews managers about to hit the eject button on Mark Andrews. That's how good Isaiah Likely was. Now, one game is one game, and I know a lot of people are thinking, well, we've seen one game wonders before pop off, and then everybody grab them on the waiver wire, and then they just fall off a cliff, right? The thing with Isaiah Likely, though, is not only did I love what I saw from him, but his numbers back him up being viable in fantasy football. These are all of his numbers from Thursday Night Football against the Chiefs. He was on the field for 70% of snaps, ran 24 routes, had 9.4 air yards per target, and 42 of those snaps came at tight end, 52% in the slot. Also, the fact that the Ravens ran more 12 personnel really helps Likely's case. They ran 12 personnel and 52% more of their snaps than any game last season. And for those that don't know, 12 personnel is essentially just 2 tight ends on the field. Combined with the fact that Likely was not just lining up at tight end, he was lining up in the slot. He even ran a post at one point, lining up at wide receiver. And the fact that Lamar was targeting him in 2-minute drill to get the ball down the field so the Ravens could make a comeback in the last 2 minutes, all spells out that Isaiah Likely will have a role in this offense. This is not a one and done kind of thing. We all know that Likely has a tight end 1 floor. Before all the Mark Andrews managers click off this video and go panic and try and trade for Isaiah Likely or even try and get him on waivers with a waiver claim, let me reassure you, Mark Andrews is not out of this offense at all. Here's the numbers to look at Mark Andrews for this past game. Andrews was on the field for 71% of the snaps. He ran 28 routes. He had 5.2 air yards per target. 30% of his snaps came from tight end, and 60% of his snaps came from the slot. All of those numbers, besides the targets and tight end snaps and air yards, are all similar or better than Isaiah Likely. Combined with the fact that Mark Andrews really hasn't had a training camp because he was injured in a car crash during it, all spells out this was a bad week for Mark Andrews, but there are bounce back weeks on the way. And for Isaiah Likely, he's a tight end 1 floor that you can grab off of waivers. That is incredibly important in fantasy football. Overall, to wrap up this point, this was a bad week for Mark Andrews and a great week for Isaiah Likely. With him being in 9% of leagues owned, Isaiah Likely's number is going to go up. So if you have that number 1 waiver claim, go grab him. Really, go grab him. And then one final point on Andrews, I still think he can get to that high where he was tight end 1, tight end 2 type of form with the Ravens. That's not a question here. I just think also the opportunity wasn't there for him to really make an impact on this game, coming off the injury he had last year, then coming off not really having a training camp. All spells bad week 1, right? I do think it will take patience with him, and patience is definitely important when you have a guy who you spent a high draft pick on.
It's Chris Jones and the Chiefs. Third and 11. The heat's coming. Lamar gets out of the way. Flips it to Justice Hill. Trying to get to the first down line at the 40, and he did. Hill out of bounds.
To be that receiver, did he go out? He did not. First down, Ravens.
Now, Justice Hill's numbers are not anything eye-popping. 11.5 PPR points, 6 receptions on 52 yards, no touchdown, right? Those numbers are not great. They're not anything eye-popping. They're solid, but they're not anything like, oh, go grab this guy with your first waiver claim. But that's not the point here. The point is, Justice Hill got a lot of the pass-catching work. Hell, this game script was basically made for him. It was made to get Zay Flowers out in the flat on a screen pass and him as well coming out of the backfield. Combined with the fact that he's a handcuff to Derrick Henry who will get all the goal line work and the early down work, we know Derrick Henry's not really going to get pass catching work. It's not something that he's always excelled at. He excels at being in between the tackles. That's what he excels at. And I'm not panicking on Derrick Henry or anything like that yet, but Hill got 51% of the snaps compared to 2 carries on the running game. With 19 routes, 8 targets, and he's only rostered in 3.4% of leagues. Could there be days that Lamar decides to dump it off to Justice Hill in the passing game when he's there on 3rd down or even earlier than that and get good PPR flex points? Yeah, absolutely. Look, Justice Hill is a handcuff to Derrick Henry. That brings value. The fact that he has so many routes in the passing game adds to that value. Now, will that rely on weekly fantasy points and weekly plus 10 points? Maybe, maybe not. It'll be hit or miss, right? But overall, I think Hill is a solid depth option to have, especially if Derrick Henry goes down.
1st and 10. Sets up screen. Addison. Oh, little hurdle through it all. And take it home for the touchdown. He had 2 defenders on him and he broke away. And the Raiders get the touchdown.
Now, my next ad is Alexander Mattison. I know, right? We all been burned by him the last 2 years. He's only owned in 10% of leagues, but here's why. I think Madison's move from Minnesota to Vegas was one of the more quiet moves in the offseason. I think generally it probably got like a week's worth of talk, but nothing really in the fantasy community. And I think it's because Madison kind of burned people the last 2 seasons, particularly with the Vikings, where many expect him to be an RB1, especially with Dalvin Cook gone. And well, he kind of failed to live up to that expectation in Minnesota. To really no fault of his own, Minnesota was not a run-first team. They barely gave him the ball that much, and when he got the ball, didn't really do a lot with it. And even with the Raiders, there was all the talk about Zamir White being the workhorse back in this offense. When in reality, we all kind of knew Zamir White was not really going to live up to that because we really didn't see that much efficiency from him even down the stretch last season. And also, this Raiders offense was not going to be lighting up the scoreboards. They were going to be chasing points and trying to get back into games, which now brings up Alexander Madison's value because he had 16.2 PPR points with the Raiders on Sunday. And a lot of his value came from, well, the passing work, which is also the giant rebuttal to his value is that, well, he had one long passing touchdown that spiked his number. However, when you look at the numbers compared to Zamir White, Alexander Madison had 59% of the snaps, 5 carries, 22 routes, 6 targets for 62 yards and a touchdown. Compared to Zamir White, who was only on the field for 39% of the snaps, 13 carries, 9 routes, 2 targets, and 46 yards. But same thing with Hill. Here, this is another depth piece ad. Essentially, we don't know what his value could be in the next few weeks if this passing number goes up or goes down. But one thing for sure, this Raiders offense is going to be down a lot of points, and they're going to need to get points up fast. I can safely say for right now, he's a flex, but he could have RB2 like value later on early in the season, so worth an ad if you need the depth.
35, pressure right in Prescott's face, letting it go. Oh! The touchdown is caught by Brandon Cooks.
Now, Brandon Cooks is owned in 29.7% of leagues according to ESPN, which is not a lot, but it is kind of a lot in a little bit, but not that much, right? And he was pretty solid in week 1, 14.5 fantasy points, 2nd in targets behind CeeDee Lamb, 2nd in receptions, receiving yards behind CeeDee Lamb, and 1st in catch percentage. He also scored the first touchdown of the game, which really helped his fantasy points and his value as well. But something else that really helps his value is the fact that we all know the Cowboys are going to run the football. We know this is going to open up more targets and opportunity for Brandon Cooks, as well as with Jake Ferguson set to miss some time with an MCL sprain that was announced this morning. I could easily see a world where Brandon Cooks takes those targets and really uses them. And he's only owned at 29% in leagues. Even if Brandon Cooks is not this week-to-week kind of guy that we saw a little bit last season where he was putting up fantasy points like 15 points a week, you're still going to want to have Brandon Cooks on your team, even if it's depth, even if it's like a wide receiver 4, wide receiver 5 on your team. We know that the Cowboys are going to want to lean on the pass. With Ferguson not there, opening up more targets for Cooks. I don't see how he's not an ad, especially with the fact that he's only owned in 29.7% of leagues.
Clock at 1 as the shotgun snap comes to Murray. He'll throw it over the middle. Catch is made on a cross by Dortch. First down. Oh, nice hesitation. Dortch a zigzag down the sideline. Dortch diving for the end zone touchdown.
Now, I'm going to take these next two players and kind of wrap them into like the same kind of category in the same place. It's Greg Dortch and Wan'Dale Robinson. Starting with Greg Dortch, he was the Cardinals' leading receiver in basically everything. He led the wide receivers in targets, in catches, in yards, and catch percentage, all adding up to 11.1 PPR points. Now, this had a lot to do with the fact that Kyler Murray was just off with Marvin Harrison Jr. yesterday. So Marvin Harrison Jr. owners, don't panic. They were just off. Kyler missed Marvin on a couple times. He threw some really bad balls. There was a couple drops by Marvin Harrison Jr. All in all, adding into just growing pains and Marvin Harrison Jr. easing into being a pro and opening up that connection and, strengthening that connection, all that stuff that goes into a wide receiver in a quarterback situation. Greg Dortch, however, showed he had very good chemistry with Kyler Murray, and Kyler Murray actually spoke very highly of Greg Dortch. Look, I wouldn't say that Greg Dortch is like this wide receiver 1 sitting on waivers. He's definitely not, but he's definitely a solid flex to wide receiver 3 high floor, but more like flex wide receiver 4 wide receiver 5. Point is, being it's going to take a while till we see the perfected connection between Marvin Harrison Jr. and Kyler Murray, I think Greg Dortch is a solid flex floor, solid add for your wide receiver depth if you need more depth at the position. Now, whether or not this volume will continue is up in the air, but Dortch is owned in 1.6% of leagues and has really taken that Rondale Moore type of role in Jonathan Gannon's offense. Now, it's kind of a similar situation for Wan'Dale Robinson of the New York Giants. Obviously, we all know the Giants had a terrible day against Minnesota, but Robinson had a solid day with 11.1 PPR points and led the team in targets and receptions, all with Malik Neighbors there. This is again like another situation where Malik Neighbors is eventually going to take this wide receiver 1 spot by the horns and just run with it. But for right now, Wan'Dale Robinson has probably the most chemistry with Daniel Jones, and it helps that he operates out of the slot and takes those intermediate to short routes, which is particularly helpful in Daniel Jones's case, where he really just can't either get out of a sack or is throwing way too many picks or making stupid throws. Wan'Dale is owned in around 11.8% of leagues. I think he's got a higher flex floor than Greg Dortch does, just because there's more of a clear role for targets and receptions and just volume in this offense. But I do think Wan'Dale Robinson is definitely worth the add, especially, again, if you need depth at the wide receiver position.
Green Bay fishing in third and long situations last season. Early test for them on their first drive. Love airs it out. Complete. Going down low. Romeo Doubs out of bounds inside the 40.
Now, next up, I have some honorable mentions. These are guys that are a little bit higher in percentage of just owned in leagues, but I definitely do think they are worth adds if they are on your waivers in your league. Now, my first honorable mention is a wide receiver where I was really surprised to be rostered so low in leagues, and I feel like is very underrated. It's Romeo Doubs of the Green Bay Packers. Now, I feel like Doubs has had like a spurt of fantasy relevance in his last 3 years in the NFL. And I'm still surprised because I feel like the Packers love this guy, and the fact that nobody really kind of picks up on how much they want to use him and get him the football, and just like he's an ad every single time, it is shocking to me, especially when you look at like his numbers from this game against the Eagles in Brazil. He ran 90% of the snaps, a team high, 33 routes, another team high, had 7 targets for 50 yards, and a team high in targets. Now, did all that equate to massive amount of fantasy points? No, he had 9 points. And with Jaden Reed and Christian Watson having massive games, you see kind of why Doubs is not really being talked about, because it's Watson, it's Reed, and then Doubs. When in reality, the numbers say that Doubs is this wide receiver 1 in this offense, and we should be grabbing him. The one problem though, and one of the reasons why he's an honorable mention on the waiver wire list, is Jordan Love's injury. That definitely took over the narrative and made everybody really want to panic on this offense. Whether it's Malik Willis or the Packers' third string quarterback, or it's somebody else, I definitely want to put the tag mark on Romeo Doubs, because I definitely do think when Jordan Love comes back, because he's not going to be out for the season, out for a few weeks, maybe 3, maybe 6, Doubs should be at his full fantasy relevance with Jordan Love back. Now, with the quarterback situation now, definitely could cap his value, but definitely worth watching. Another guy worth the honorable mention is Khalil Shakir. He's owned in 49.8% of leagues. Had a solid day for the Bills, 13.2 fantasy points in BPR, second in targets, second in receptions. Obviously, we know the Bills offense is going to spread this ball out. Everybody's going to eat. But Khalil Shakir sneakily had a very good game, and it was very big for this Bills offense when they needed it. He had that huge touchdown to give them the lead, and his yards after contact and his strength overall really is just eye-popping. I'm a Bills fan, but I'm taking my Bills hat off for this one. I love Khalil Shakir in fantasy. I know he's owned in 49.8% of leagues, which is a lot, so if he's on your waivers somehow, I would go grab him for depth. Could be a solid flex to wide receiver 2 spot. Once again, another receiver that is very much highly owned in a lot of leagues, it's Rashid Shaheed of the New York Orleans Saints. Look, the Saints absolutely blew the back out of the Carolina Panthers, and Shaheed had 16.3 fantasy points. Was the leader in targets and receptions over Chris Olave. Look, he's the home run hitter in this offense. When Derek Carr goes deep, which is going to be a lot, Rashid Shaheed is going to be on the end of those balls. If he can catch a long touchdown every game, he's a solid wide receiver 3 or even maybe a flex option. But he's got a wide open spot to be, honestly, the wide receiver 2 under Chris Olave. Remember, Michael Thomas is suspended. There's really nobody else under Chris Olave that is really competing with Shaheed for targets. Maybe Jawan Johnson, maybe Alvin Kamara, maybe even Taysom Hill, right? But for what his role is, and that being the home run hitter in this offense going deep, nah, nobody else. Definitely worth an ad because we know Derek Carr is going to throw the football. This Saints offense is going to want to throw the football. Yeah, it was against the Carolina Panthers, so be kind of wary about that. But look, Rashid Shaheed is probably worth an ad, especially if you want to get deeper in your wide receiver room. And finally, my last honorable mention, if you need to stream a quarterback, I think Baker Mayfield is the way to go. Baker, to me, has solid matchups going forward. He had a great night against the Commanders, 29.6 fantasy points. Especially if you're relying on Jordan Love to be your starter in a deeper league or in a bigger league, I think Baker Mayfield, if he still is on waivers, he's worth a spot. Overall, depending on your quarterback situation, go for someone who rushes or can throw the ball a lot. Overall, though, those are all my fantasy football waiver wire ads for week 1. Make sure you're tuned in and subscribe for waiver wire week 2, and make sure you check out the article down below on our DDSN website so you don't miss any of the news going on in the world of sports. With that being said, though, I've been Josh, and I will see you guys later.